Hey, what's going on everyone out there? I'm Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel, where you'll find some of the most fair and honest game reviews out here.
Hello there.
And it's finally time, people. Time to rank every single Star Wars game on the Ultimate Star Wars Games tier list. We're tackling the big one, PC games. Every Star Wars PC game that has ever come out so far is going to get put onto the tier list. And there is, as you could see right now, there is a lot of games to get through. Nearly 50 games that have come out on PC, I should say. I almost said PlayStation. But the reason why I say that is because if you haven't already watched my previous videos of this entire series where we've been ranking every single Star Wars game, go check them out. We've done every single PlayStation game on every PlayStation platform. We've done every single Star Wars game on Xbox platforms as well. We've done every single Nintendo handheld Star Wars game and every single Nintendo Star Wars game on home consoles, including also on top of that, we did every single third-party console as well. So Sega Genesis platforms or Sega platforms, everything involving anything else that's not part of the big three.
Impressive. Most impressive.
But now finally, the biggest one that we're doing so far is on PC. As you could tell, again, look at all those games. And we're going to go through every single one of them. So we're going to break this up. I actually have a list. I'm going via Wikipedia because they literally have every single official Star Wars game that was licensed ever released on PC. Now, a couple ground rules here before we really get into this, and I know I'm taking long.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
But there is a couple exceptions, like we've done in the previous entries of this series, that we're not going to count. So obviously, we're not counting anything that's like Star Wars Pinball, no Angry Birds Star Wars, but more specifically to the PC realm, we're not counting fan games, and we're also not counting virtual reality here. Virtual reality is going to be another entry at some point, which I was kind of debating a little bit about it, whether to include VR games because, you know, you need a good PC to run them. But then I started thinking about other platforms like the PlayStation VR, the Oculus Rift, the Vive, and everything else. So we're not going to include VR games in this list because we are strictly sticking to the PC Star Wars games that came out officially on places like Windows, places like Steam, etc. And I feel like, you know, again, we have so many games to get through already, so it is what it is. But anyway, let's finally get started because there's so much to get through. And we're going to go through this list on every single one. So you can follow along with me on Wikipedia if you decide to do so. But starting off the first game that we have to start out with, like I've done in previous entries, we're going to start out with, if I can find the box art for it because there's so many, Star Wars, the arcade game, the original arcade game that came out first in arcades but also got ported over to the PC as well, and many other different platforms. Like I've told everybody, this game is still solid, this game is still pretty awesome. As far as PC is concerned, when it comes to comparing it to all the other PC Star Wars games that have come out over the years, I'm going to put this one, honestly, I'm going to put it in the... If I have to be real with all of you, it's not trash, don't get me wrong. It's not going to be in trash tier down here, but I will put it in a solid B tier, okay? Star Wars the arcade game, again, it's a classic. If you played this on the original arcade hardware, you know exactly how much fun it can be with all of its different sounds, the voice or the speech that comes from it, the replayability, getting high scores. It's an awesome game overall. I've talked about it already plenty of times at this point, but for the sake of the PC tier list, because I think I ranked it higher in my previous ones, I'm going to put Star Wars Arcade in B tier. Now, going from there, let's go to another one that's actually in the arcade that also got ported to PC. Star Wars Return of the Jedi. Now, Return of the Jedi, this one is a little bit different than the previous Star Wars games that were in the arcades, because we had Star Wars and we also had The Empire Strikes Back, but now we also got Return of the Jedi. This Return of the Jedi arcade game is based on the scenes in Endor, so the speeder bikes. You're playing as Luke Skywalker, you're trying to dodge all the different trees, Imperial Scout troopers that are riding on their own speeder bikes, and everything else. This one I'm going to put in C tier.
What?
And the reason why I'm putting this one in C tier is because while it is a little bit different than the previous arcade games, and again, this also got ported to PC, it still is not only super challenging, like almost kind of unfairly challenging in some cases, but it's still different. It's a different scene of the movie from Return of the Jedi. Doesn't utilize, again, the Death Star stuff, doesn't utilize the lightsaber combat, but it's still pretty cool to see nonetheless. It's not bad, but it kind of just is. For some people, they might actually prefer this game, but for others, there are many other better Star Wars games, especially on PC, that are out there.
I got a bad feeling about this.
Moving on from there, this one's going to be another one that's like a little bit weird that it's going to be low on the list. Where is it? Star Wars Droid Works. Star Wars Droid Works is basically like, imagine being able to create your own droids. Like, just the mix and match different things. It's kind of fun for, like, the first, like, little bit that you mess around with it, but it quickly loses its charm over time. So unless you're a really big, diehard Star Wars fan, or at least you love droids and you love the technology aspect of this, you're not going to be too much into this game, even for the most diehard PC guys out there, because most of you, I'm pretty sure, are going to be playing a variety of other different Star Wars games on PC. But this one isn't trash, but I will put this, honestly, in the D tier. The reason why it's in D tier is because it has its charm. It's still something interesting when it comes to making and combining it, like, you know, all different types of droids together and actually making that stuff work, okay? It's not necessarily like an action-based type of game. It takes place in the Star Wars universe, but it's like one of those games that you're going to see on here a lot with Star Wars PC games that are really... They're not built upon the action. They're built more about being part of that universe as far as something interesting and kind of like out of pocket compared to what we got with a lot of the other Star Wars games that are so much more focused on the action of the series. Now, moving from there, Star Wars chess. Okay? Star Wars chess, man. It's chess. Enough said. Okay? But it just has Star Wars kind of like injected into it, or is given a Star Wars coat of paint. Like I said for the Sega CD version, I'm going to put this in C tier because it's not necessarily bad. It's not lower on the totem pole. And I feel like you could probably replay this a little bit more, maybe more so than DroidWorks. But, you know, it is still essentially just chess with just Star Wars characters on it. It's not anything more like super special, but it's not like garbage. It's not trash. I can't say that it's a bad game. I can't say it's a bad Star Wars game at that, because it does what it sets out to do. At least you know what it was made for. It's chess, but with Star Wars. Nothing wrong with that.
Don't make me destroy you.
Now, moving on from there, now we start to get cooking with the Star Wars PC games. And I know my Star Wars PC peeps out there are really going to enjoy this one. Where is it? I'm looking for the correct box art, because there's so many box arts in here. There's like 50 of these games. So y'all got to give me a second. Here it is. Star Wars X-Wing. Okay, Star Wars X-Wing. This is the first in a series of games that really tries to simulate the idea of being behind an X-Wing like starfighter, or any starfighter for that matter, because we had X-Wing, we had TIE Fighter, we had X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, X-Wing Alliance, the list goes on, and we'll get to those in just a bit. But for the sake of the first game, being like, you know, something that's charming as far as like trying to actually replicate the idea of being behind an X-Wing starfighter, it is pretty darn good. And for many people, this is a classic. Like, this is really up there. However,
I have a bad feeling about this. I've got a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Oh, I have a bad feeling about this.
the big issue that I have with this game, like a lot of these other PC games from like back in the Windows 95, Windows XP days, a lot of them have not aged well for a variety of reasons, both in terms of design and also terms of running on current hardware. I have all these games on Steam, right? There's a bunch of different bundles you could get the X-Wing games on Steam. And the problem is that sometimes these games just flat out just crash. Even though you have a perfect PC to run them, you have great hardware, everything's working great, all of a sudden these games will just like crash on you. On top of that, a lot of these games were made for that older hardware, so with a lot of those types of specs in mind. So being able to use like a controller, use a joypad, or anything else like that, especially with current gen hardware, it's not always the best. If you've played these games recently, you know like the struggle to actually get them to run correctly. Not just getting them to run, but getting them to run correctly, okay? So for that matter, the first X-Wing game, I'm going to put in C tier.
What?
It's not bad. It's not a bad game. However, it's aged pretty poorly in some respects. It's unfortunate because, again, it's such a classic. Again, anybody that plays Star Wars games on PC knows about this series.
I don't believe that. And you're sounding like a separatist.
Speaking of which, let's go to the next one. Let's go to TIE Fighter. Okay, TIE Fighter is a little bit more different. I think this was the second or X-Wing Alliance, because again, I get a little bit mixed up with the ordering of these, but I'm going to go through each one of these games, okay? This one's a little bit better, but from the TIE Fighter, the Imperial perspective, very similar in premise to X-Wing, which is cool because, again, people that love the Rebel Alliance would also love the idea of being able to play things from the Empire's perspective with the same idea, similar controls, a few little tweaks to quality of life stuff. However, again, I run into the same issue with X-Wing, but I also apply to TIE Fighter. I'm putting it in C tier because of that reason.
You were the chosen one!
again, these games they haven't aged as gracefully as we would like them to. I would love to see X-Wing and TIE Fighter get some sort of remaster or reimagining. You know, obviously we have Squadrons, which is like built in the same spirit, but I mean an actual titled Star Wars X-Wing remastered or remake or whatever. I feel like same thing with TIE Fighter, that it would be really cool to see that and see like how that approach, like given the same stuff with Squadrons, but applied to the actual content of these games. Be kind of cool. Speaking of which, X-Wing Alliance. Now, this is when things start to get a little bit better, and they start to age a little bit more gracefully compared to their predecessors. For that reason, X-Wing Alliance goes in B tier. Again, it's a good game, a little bit better as far as controls are concerned, as far as quality of life is concerned. Very, very similar. I do have to note, too, that with the X-Wing games and TIE Fighter as well, there were expansions, I believe. Okay, I'm just not including expansions in here because I'm including just the games themselves. But a lot of stuff, including the mod scene, other things that can get involved with this, you start to see a lot of this when we start to get more towards the era of X-Wing Alliance, TIE Fighter, X-Wing itself, and then, of course, finally, the last one that's part of the series, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, which I believe was the last one that was released. If not, X-Wing Alliance came afterwards. That one also gets put into B tier. This is when I feel like this series started to really come into its own and really become the classic that a lot of people really love, or at least people that now play Star Wars games at this point, especially on PC, kind of reminisce on, because I think it's also the best one as far as quality of life is concerned, or at least between that and X-Wing Alliance. So those are the X-Wing games, okay? Those are the games that I feel like are the ones that really work out for the better, okay? And I'm just looking now, going over my list here, because I went through all of them here, and I kind of like jumping through the list. So that's pretty cool. Those are all the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games, absolute classics. You could get those in a bundle right now, I know, on Steam and other places as well. They're just really good games overall.
Nice work, Rogue Squadron. We might make a name for ourselves after all.
Next game we're going to jump to, again, we're kind of running through some of these games because there's so many. We're going to go to, we did X-Wing, we did TIE Fighter. Let's go to another classic. Where is it? Looking for the box art, There it is. Rebel Assault. Now, Rebel Assault is another classic, much like the X-Wing series, that I feel like has really had a rough time aging gracefully, because the idea and the premise of it is really darn cool. The idea of that, again, you're going through a lot of these different style of, like, you know, games that are, you know, much more shooter and kind of like oriented to like an on-rails type of thing. Very similar to the other sequel that came afterwards, which also, by the way, Rebel Assault was only released on the Sega CD and on the PC. It never came to any other platform, which was interesting. But this one I'm going to put in C tier because Rebel Assault is another one that I feel like is kind of janky, hasn't aged all that gracefully, still cool in premise, not garbage, but still not as good as it probably should be after years after its release. Now, moving on to its sequel, Rebel Assault 2, which is another one. This is the game that came to PlayStation 1 that had its own version of it, while this one also had a PC version. This one is also going into C tier because I've talked about this even on the PlayStation tier list. This game, it's kind of stiff, but it's still kind of cool because it takes place after Episode 4, and there's good ideas there, and you get to see like a Corellian ship, which is pretty much the Millennium Falcon, but again, it's harder to control. It's a little bit more stiff trying to get the aiming right. For some people, especially if you play more modern games where the quality of life bar is a little bit higher, this one would be a little bit annoying to play, especially if you don't have a PC that could keep it running stable. Again, a lot of these games, they just crash for whatever reason when you try to run them off of Steam, but it is what it is. Yeah! So those are some classic games right there. Look at this list so far. Not bad. Not bad, not garbage, thank God. It's not as bad as the Nintendo handheld games is concerned. But look at all those classic PC Star Wars games. We got the arcade games, we got Star Wars Chess, we got the X-Wing series looking pretty good. That's awesome. Now, let's move on to another classic. That I should say, a classic, I use that term really loosely. Star Wars Yoda stories.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
So where the heck is Star Wars Yoda stories going to go? This is infamous for being one of the worst Star Wars games for a lot of people. And it's unfortunate because the way I look at this, I think people are way too hard on this game. It's just that for the time that this was developed, this game wasn't like made for like crazy hardware. This was made on like Windows 95. Yeah, pretty sure it was Windows 95. And it was kind of like an idea of like a Star Wars RPG to an extent with procedurally generated like layouts. So it's not necessarily like the same locations you're going to find items and key points of interest all over the place at the exact same place every single time. Unfortunately, despite that, it's still very difficult to play because of that. So while I do think that this was still limited and was very ambitious for the time, but it was limited by its hardware, it's still not going to be high up on the tier list here. Unfortunately, I'm still going to put this game in the D tier list. It's not trash like what people have been saying, okay? Like, again, I understand why. Some people think that this game is one of the worst Star Wars games around, but I've played worse. As someone who's played literally almost every single Star Wars game that has come out for many, many years, I can tell you right now, I've played worse games than Yoda stories. Remember Flight of the Falcon? Remember Masters of Terras Kasi? Contrary to what everybody says, I'm telling you right now, those games are probably just as bad, if not worse, than Yoda stories. But I digress. That's a debate for another time.
See through you. We can.
Let me know if you agree with me with the tier list so far, especially with Yoda stories, down below in the comments section. And also, don't forget to leave a like on this video. After Yoda stories, and we already did X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, which I'm looking on the list here on Wikipedia, but now let's go to another classic, one of my favorite classics, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, okay? Now, I've talked about this game extensively. Okay, I love Shadows of the Empire. One of the best EU stories out there. If you were part of the hype back in the day in like the mid-90s for Shadows of the Empire and you saw the books, the comics, the game on N64, you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. So the game for the N64 got ported over to the PC. And instead of just a one-to-one port, it actually had cutscenes, like CG cutscenes for the PC version of Shadows of the Empire, which is cool, which I love, which I appreciate. Granted, the CG is very rough right now because it hasn't aged all that well, but still, it's essentially the same story as the N64 game, just with voice acting, with different types of visuals, but the gameplay is almost exactly the same. And if you have a good PC to run it, you could run it at like 60 frames per second and make it run really good. The controls could still be a little bit stiff. I prefer the N64 controls, but you could make things work with a PC mouse and keyboard or even a gamepad. So, that being said, though, how does it stack up on the tier list here? I don't think it's S or A tier. Let me put it that way. As much as I love this game, I don't think it's high up on the tier list. And I definitely don't think it's trash. And I don't even think it's D tier. So does it end up being B tier or C tier? Now, even though I scored the N64 version one way, this one might end up being differently. I'm going to put this in B tier. For a couple reasons. Number one, story is pretty darn good, okay, for an EU Star Wars story. Number two, we have the extra cutscenes and the voice acting that's different from the N64 version. Some people prefer that version over this one. I understand it. Number three, it runs pretty darn good on a PC, no matter what your PC hardware is. So, while I might have given Shadows of the Empire maybe, I think a C tier when I did the N64 list or the Nintendo console list, I still think that this is a solid B tier for PC specifically. So even though it's a little bit different, I find that the PC version is still pretty good for what it is.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
The next one, okay, the next big one, that's like Star Wars PC game related. We have to talk about this one. Okay? Star Wars Dark Forces, okay? This is a classic. Hands down a classic. Absolutely, definitely holds up very, very well. If you guys know, I've talked about Dark Forces a couple times. I think I reviewed Dark Forces, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, if I didn't, I know I definitely talked about it a bunch of times. But I've also talked about the rest of the Jedi Knight series, which Dark Forces is the first game starring Kyle Katarn that continues onward into the Jedi Knight games. So if you never played this before, you definitely need to play this. But also, lucky for all of you, there's a remaster of this game coming out for modern consoles. New visuals, tweaked up quality of life stuff with the controls, and maybe a few other extra little tidbits. So there's going to be options for you to play Dark Forces. But how does it stack up on the tier list? For me, this is also another solid B-tier Star Wars game, okay? Dark Forces, it borrows a lot from Doom, but it puts Star Wars into it, and it feels and sounds good to play. If you've never played it before, give it a try or wait for the remaster to come out because it's going to be even better. I still feel like, again, Star Wars Legends story, stars Kyle Katarn, it still has some good stuff to offer, and it still kind of holds up even today pretty well. Granted, again, it's a very stiff game because it follows the same design premises as Doom, but it's still pretty darn good. And if you didn't already know, on the PSN, you could get the PS1 version of this game, which again, plays very similar to Doom with a few extra little tidbits. The PS1 version, I think, has extra stages or extra levels that are geared exclusively to that platform, but this is a PC game. Like, if you know, PC is the platform for FPS games, especially games that are built in the same vein as Doom. Like, it's just the way it is. If you got a PC, you're going to run Doom, you should also be able to play Dark Forces as well. So, yeah.
Another happy landing.
Let's go to a different one, okay? Let's talk about... Where is it? I know it's in here somewhere, okay? Star Wars Rebellion, okay? Star Wars Rebellion is one of those games that, like, gets better over time because of the mod scene. If you've never played Star Wars Rebellion before, if you like RTS or you like strategy games, this is definitely right up your alley. There's a lot of resource and other types of management that go along with it, and don't get me wrong, the genre gets better later on with other games we're definitely going to talk about, but this is one that people really love because of the extra like content that comes afterwards, and I really appreciate it. So we're going to get into some of these other games that, with the mod scene, all the extra content packs and expansions really make some of these games even better as they age. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them. And this is probably one of the first ones that really does that. Besides maybe Dark Forces, you could argue. I don't remember really a lot of mods for Dark Forces, but Rebellion is where you really start to see this start to cook, right? And for me, if I have to be honest, you know, because again, I'm not a huge RTS guy, but I've also played the majority, if not all of these RTS games. Compared to the rest of the ones we're probably going to get onto the list, this one I would still put in B tier as well. Again, we're starting to get the B tier start to build up a lot, and you might see this grow a little bit more. But Rebellion, again, if you're not into the genre, this is definitely not up your alley and not something you could really play. But if you are, there's a lot of good stuff in here. And I feel like if you have a lot of patience for RTS games, if you love Star Wars and you love expansions to games like this, you're really going to have a great time. I feel like there's a lot of good stuff in there for you. A little bit of Star Wars Legends, a little bit of Star Wars lore that kind of got, you know, plays off. But still, it's pretty good. But when we get to later on into the tier list here, you'll understand why I'll explain, you know, but you'll come to understand why some of these other games kind of build upon this and make it the genre, or at least Star Wars in the genre of RTS, even better. Let's go to another favorite, which I still think holds up pretty darn good. Where is it? Where is it? Where's that box? Sorry, we know where it is. There it is. Star Wars Rogue Squadron 3D. This is the PC version of Star Wars Rogue Squadron that's on the Nintendo 64. You guys know I love Rogue Squadron. One of the best games, hands down, for Star Wars games, especially on the Nintendo platform. Spawned an amazing series that continued on to the GameCube, but they did have a port of the first game onto PC. Now here's the problem though, okay?
I've got a bad feeling about this, sir.
Unfortunately, this version of the game is not as good as the N64 version, because as much as I love Rogue Squadron, I think it's a really high up on the tier list. Unfortunately, the PC version has some issues that you need mods in order to make it run. So for that reason alone, unfortunately, the PC version of this game, I have to put in C tier.
What?
What?
And it pains me to say that, right? Because I love Rogue Squadron. Rogue Squadron 1 is an amazing game. It holds up. But the PC version of Rogue Squadron on here, unfortunately, has a lot of camera issues, has a lot of problems with the mouse and keyboard. You need a controller in order to play this game really good. Some people prefer the mouse and keyboard, but I feel like Rogue Squadron, you need a joypad. You just need a controller to play that game and really enjoy it and really experience it the way it was meant to be experienced. And unfortunately, the PC version just has all those technical hurdles that really kind of bog down the experience. If you have a good PC, you can make it run really good. You could actually get some mods and stuff to make it run at like 60 frames per second or run pretty darn good. And even make it like widescreen, or I think even like, you know, boost up like the actual visual fidelity of it. But bare bones on the surface level, like as far at its core, the PC version of Rogue Squadron, not that good. And it sucks because that game is amazing. If you want to play Rogue Squadron, go play the N64 version of this. Or, LucasArts, please remaster the Rogue Squadron games, especially this one, okay? Combine the N64 and the PC version, bring that content and all that extra stuff into the N64 version, and put it on the Switch for us. Or put it on PS5. You know what I'm saying? I want to see this happen. So moving on from there, right? Let's talk about Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Where is it? I know it's box art. See, there it is.
Now this is Pod Racer.
Episode 1 Racer got ported over to the PC. This game was on N64. It was also ported over to modern day consoles, which you could get available right now. This game, again, I'm not a huge fan of the pod racing games. I think a lot of people overhype them because I feel like while they're good for racers, you know, in essence at their core, unfortunately the amount of content that you get in them is not all that great. I feel like you could get a lot more value out of playing something like F-Zero or Mario Kart than something like this. As much as I love Star Wars, that's the truth. So unfortunately, the PC version is not that much different from the console counterparts, so this goes right into C tier, which is, it's a shame because we need good pod racing games. I feel like we should have gotten more pod racing games to really build and iterate on them, but we never really got something like that, unfortunately, for a lot of places. We only had really 2 main pod racing games, besides a third one that's in the arcades, which is Episode 1 Racer and Episode 1 Racer's Revenge, which is the sequel to this, which is on the PlayStation 2. We've talked about that in the PlayStation list. Go check out that video if you want to hear more about that. But the PC version of this, same game, not really anything different. It just runs on PC, and it's kind of just there.
I don't believe that. And you're sounding like a separatist.
Moving on to the next one. Here's another one that got ported over to PC, which is surprising, right? Where is the boxer? There it is. Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Now, this is another game that I feel like is a classic for many people, but just doesn't really do much else on PC. Like, it was on PlayStation 1, which is where the majority of people played this game, but they had a PC version of it, and it is what it is. This one is kind of going into C tier. It's just kind of there. There's not much else to say about it. I talked about this game, the PlayStation 1 version, in that PlayStation video. I said, like, look, I think that this game was decent for what it was. It's a time capsule of the time when Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, was originally coming out. But we ended up getting Jedi Power Battles right afterwards, which I feel like is the better game in comparison to this one.
At last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi.
As much as this one follows the events of the movie, I think Jedi Power Battles is the better game as far as what's based on Episode 1. So that game, Phantom Menace for PC, goes into C tier. Moving on from there, we go to the next one. Where is it? Yoda's Challenge, okay? Yoda's Challenge. This is one of those kind of like learning games that we see a lot on the PC, and Star Wars as a franchise has had a bunch of different games like this, and there's not really much to say about this game. Like, it's really not that special. So unfortunately, this is going to be one of the first trash tier games that I put into here.
What?
And I only say that because I get that it's a learning game. I get that it's made to teach kids that are, again, trying to learn like specific elements or like, you know, different like, you know, puzzles and stuff like that. I get it. However, in comparison to the rest of these games, I would argue this is worse than Yoda Stories.
It's not true. That's impossible.
The only main reason being is because this is not an ambitious game. This doesn't really offer that much value to a lot of people out there that love Star Wars games. It's decent for what it is, you know, for a kid that's trying to learn something. But in the grand scheme of Star Wars games out there, when it comes to value, when it comes to content, when it comes to stories, this really isn't it. And unfortunately, a lot of the different learning games are going to be probably in the trash tier more than likely, as far as, you know, when I think about it here. It's just that, again, they're kind of just there. They don't offer any value. You're not really going to want to go and play these Star Wars games that are like this. Even I would argue little kids more than likely are going to want to go play one of the other Star Wars games. They want to play Rogue Squadron. They want to play Episode 1 Racer. They want to shoot stuff. They want to play Shadows of the Empire. They want to play, you know, X-Wing or TIE Fighter, because that's more of like the true fantasy of Star Wars games as opposed to like what it feels like doing homework. And again, it shouldn't really feel like that. It's supposed to be fun. And I'm not talking about like little kids, like below 10 years old, but like kids of age that know Star Wars, that are passionate and they care about Star Wars, are not going to want to go play a game like this, which is unfortunate. That's just the way it is. Here's the next one, okay, because I see it here on the list. Star Wars Pit Droids, which is like a puzzle like slash like, you know, like strategy type of game where you're pretty much like you're Watto, or like you're controlling the different droids from Episode 1 that are in Watto's like Watto's Grove or Watto's like garage, right? And it has its charm. It has a bunch of puzzles and stuff, but again, it's not that great. So don't expect it to be up here on the tier list. Not as good as any of these games. It's going right into D list, right? I mean, I'm sorry, Watto fans, but like, there's not really much here to enjoy. Pit Droids, again, it's puzzles, and it just doesn't do anything else. Doesn't really do a lot of things for Episode 1. Doesn't really do a lot of things for the Star Wars franchise as a whole. You'll probably play this one time or maybe 2 times, and then just don't care about it. Won't even remember it after that.
What, you think you're some kind of Jedi waving your hand around like that?
It is what it is. It's right there next to Yoda Stories and DroidWorks. And out of the bunch of the D tier games, DroidWorks is probably the most ambitious and the most interesting, personally for me, as far as in comparison to everything else out there. But I digress, though. Moving on from there, Star Wars Jar Jar's Journey Adventure. Where is it? There it is. It's another trash tier Star Wars game because another one of those learning games that, again, meant for very, very young kids, but doesn't really offer anything else beyond that. You might not even remember it after playing it one time. You might not even care to play it that time. Just, it is what it is. Star Wars Force Commander. This is what I'm talking about, okay? Now we're starting to get cooking with Star Wars games on PC, okay? We're really starting to get cooking. After the X-Wing games, after Shadows of the Empire, now we start to get cooking. Star Wars Force Commander, real-time strategy, literally commanding different forces. There was some expansions for this that was pretty dope for a lot of Star Wars fans that love that RTS goodness, okay? And if I'm being real with y'all, A-tier Star Wars game. It's going right up there, okay?
Impressive. Most impressive.
Force Commander is an A-tier Star Wars game. If you love that genre of game in general, and you love the Star Wars coat of paint on it, this is really going to give you so much, and again, with the expansions and stuff afterwards, that are really going to give you a lot of fun to play through. The games, as they get on further along the line, when we start to get to some of the other ones you know are coming, you'll understand that some of those games just get even better and better. It just makes that genre of RTS fans have so much more to chew on. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, A-tier Star Wars game for Star Wars Force Commander. Next game on there, okay, where is it? Star Wars Math. Again, another trash tier game that goes along. All these learning games are going to be in trash tier. That's just the way it is. Comparison to all these other games here, even worse than Yoda Stories, I would argue, because of their purpose and their relevance. Some people would put Yoda Stories in trash tier along with these games, but I don't think so. I think that at least Yoda Stories was ambitious enough to try something different for the time that it was developed and the time that it was actually made for that particular Windows hardware or PC hardware. After that, right? I'm trying to make sure I go in order here. Star Wars Starfighter, where is it? I know it's around here someplace. Where's that box art? Okay, Star Wars Starfighter. We've talked about this already a couple times. I put this one, honestly, Star Wars Starfighter, I put this in B tier, you know, as far as PC, because there's not really much difference I can say about this game compared to the Xbox version, to the PS2 version. You're not really getting any much different. Again, if you love Star Wars Rogue Squadron, if you love Starfighters and just the ability to pilot a Starfighter, this is right up your alley. And Starfighter focused mostly on Episode 1 time frame, like around the time of The Phantom Menace, which is cool. Funny enough, we got this game, but we never got Jedi Starfighter on PC, as far as I know. I played Jedi Starfighter on both the PlayStation 2 and on the Xbox, and yeah, PlayStation 2 and the Xbox, and it's just like, it's pretty dope. It's pretty cool.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
So, either way, moving on from there, because there's not much else to say about Star Wars Starfighter, let's go to Episode 1, The Battle for Naboo. Now, I forgot that this got ported over to PC, but it's essentially the exact same game as, the one on Nintendo 64, almost one for one to an extent. Not much else to say about this. I will say that this is a little bit better than Star Wars Rogue Squadron on PC because of the way that it runs. It actually runs pretty darn good. But I am still going to put this in C tier. The only reason why I'm putting this in C tier is because, again, if you're going to play this game, I feel like you'll play it on N64. You don't really get much different on the PC other than the fact that it's just on PC. It just doesn't offer anything else beyond that. And I don't think it's better, honestly, Battle for Naboo, as much as I like that style of game, I don't think it's better than some of the X-Wing games. I don't think it's better than some of the other games. I don't think it's better than Starfighter. At least Starfighter has better visuals and just, you know, again, focuses on that same time frame with just a little bit of different context, and I just think it's better overall as far as these two games are concerned. Okay, Battle for Naboo is still pretty good, but for the PC version, I'm putting it in C tier. I feel like that's fair enough to put it there. Now we get to some good ones. Now we get to some really good ones here. Okay, look at this list. Very diverse compared to a lot of the other tier lists that we've done so far. But the next one we get is a classic for many people. Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds, okay? This is when things start to really cook for the RTS genre. This one's going up there to S tier, okay? I'm putting it up there. S tier Star Wars game for a lot of people. The expansions of this, I know one of the big expansions for this one, I believe, was the Clone Wars expansion. Very similar in premise. RTS, you're controlling forces from either the Rebels or the Imperials, and with the Clone Wars, it's either the Republic or the CIS, and it's just fun RTS action. A lot of great scenarios, a lot of great, I guess you could say, sandbox stuff to control different forces. If you love RTS games, this was one of the first big Star Wars RTS games that really did it for you. Okay, and the next one, when we talk about that afterwards, we'll get into more of it, but it only just got better from there.
Impressive. Most impressive.
After Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds, let's go to another classic. This one's up there. This was an A-tier Star Wars game. Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast. The sequel to Star Wars Dark Forces. The sequel to Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, because Jedi Knight was also on, was on PC. But also, again, I'm going to put this also here in the same thing because this one's the same time frame. Star Wars Jedi Knight, Dark Forces 2. So those two games, I'm putting both in A tier, okay? Even though I think that Jedi Outcast is a little bit better than the original Jedi Knight for obvious reasons, Jedi Knight actually had a bunch of expansions, including one where you got to play as Mara Jade, which is dope. Okay, that's the first time, I think, before Masters of Terras Kasi, where you got to play as Mara Jade in any sort of thing. And I think also in Galactic Battlegrounds and other RTS games, there were mods to input Mara Jade into the actual game, because you actually got different heroes and stuff. Actually, no, I think it was Empire of War that actually did that. But I digress, though, okay? The point is, the Jedi Knight games, Jedi Knight 1 and Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast, fantastic, amazing Star Wars games on PC. Because the mod scenes for them were awesome, okay? Especially for Jedi Outcast, right? These games are fantastic. They star Kyle Katarn, continuing his story. They get real deep into some crazy territory with a lot of stuff that's going on, right? And if you love Star Wars Expanded Universe stuff, this is where a lot of that great stuff for video games in particular for Star Wars really came out of. Again, the Jedi Knight games are fantastic, the entire series. But speaking of which, we did it before. Let's do Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy, automatic S tier Star Wars game on all platforms. Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy, fantastic game, amazing mod scene. It's got your own creative character that you can do in the base game. Has the story that it has in there that I've reviewed. If you haven't seen my review of Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy, go check it out here on the channel later. I have a full video about it. But on PC, the mods for this game are fantastic. You got Star Wars movie duels that came straight out of this game, using this as the bare bones for it, that also use Jedi Outcast as well, but there's just so much to love with this game. So much to love with Jedi Academy. Still, people to this day still think that game, Jedi Academy and Jedi Outcast, have some of the best lightsaber combat in all of Star Wars and the entire franchise in video game history. But still, automatic S tier Star Wars game. Look at this. Look at this list so far. This tier list is really solid. We got a good variety, a good diverse layout of Star Wars games. Between S tier, we got two fantastic ones. Some people would argue I should put Jedi Outcast in S tier, but I think that Jedi Academy is just much better than Jedi Outcast, even though Jedi Outcast has the better story, okay? And same thing also with the Jedi Knight games, Force Commander, Galactic Battlegrounds. Look at all these great Star Wars games, man. Fantastic. Okay, sensational, as one guy would actually say. So, moving up from there, okay, let's go to a big one. This one we're going to talk about here, Star Wars Galaxies, okay? So, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I am not an MMO guy, okay? I'm not an MMO player. I'm not big into MMOs, but I did mess around with this back in the day, very lightly, just to get an idea of it, okay? Same idea where I played RuneScape for a bit, just to kind of, dip my toes into it, and the same thing with WoW. So Star Wars Galaxy is the big MMO for a lot of people back in the day, that when it came to actually getting involved in the MMO scene, being able to play in the Star Wars universe. If you were a Star Wars fan and you were playing MMOs and in other games, you were definitely playing Star Wars Galaxies. And it had 3 major expansions for it that changed the game up in various ways. At one point, it was nearly impossible to become a Jedi, and then later on, afterwards, it became a lot easier to become a Jedi, and it pissed off some people for one reason or another, but still, this was a very ambitious, very big game, okay? But how does it compare to everything else on the tier list here? Well, I'm telling you right now, it's not trash tier. It's not any of these here. It's not C tier. So out of the top 3, where would I rank this? Speaking purely objectively, okay?
I got a bad feeling about this.
As far as someone that, even though I'm not a huge MMO fan, I could still respect and have reverence for what this game was trying to do, because Star Wars Galaxy was a huge game. There's no way to undermine that. There's no way to underplay that. It was such a huge game. But the other aspect of why I actually put, whoops, I don't put this in B tier. Why it's not in B tier. The only reason why I think that it's not automatic S tier is because I feel that the barrier of entry to Star Wars Galaxies was still pretty steep for some people. There was a lot of players on this game, but not everybody was playing this game. I know Star Wars fans that are diehard Star Wars fans that never once played Star Wars Galaxies because it was an MMO, because of how intimidating it was for a lot of people. So for that reason alone, okay, I'm going to honestly put Star Wars Galaxies in A tier.
Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million.
I feel like A tier is a fair way or fair spot to put Star Wars Galaxies. It's an ambitious game. It was big. There was a lot of stuff to do. There was multiple expansions. It was a great way for Star Wars as a franchise to get into the MMO genre that was pretty big for a lot of people and still kind of in its, like, you know, beginnings, because this was before World of Warcraft, I believe, because I think Star Wars Galaxies was after RuneScape, and I think it was after Final Fantasy 11. I could be wrong in the time frame, but I would have to look at the year. But it was still within that time frame where the internet and MMOs were still kind of like, you know, really growing into what it would eventually become. Okay, but still, at some point the game I think also just came to an end. But still, it was a very good game, very big game for Star Wars fans back in the day. So outside of that, okay, look at this tier list, man. For PC Star Wars games, I'm really pleased with this. A lot of good stuff going on here. Let's move on to another classic, okay? I just trying to double check my list here. We did Jedi Academy as well. Let's go to another classic. Automatic S tier, where is it? Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Automatic freaking S tier. Like, I can't even... Again, I've talked about this game so much now at this point. Talked about it on the Xbox... Xbox tier list. I did a full video review of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, which you guys could go watch here on the channel. Again, this game is fan-freaking-tastic. Automatic S tier. Fantastic Star Wars game. One of the best out there. Arguably the best Star Wars game ever made. Arguably for a lot of people. Must play if you haven't already. Especially if you haven't played it on consoles, on the Xbox platforms. Play it on PC. I know that PC sometimes has a couple of little hiccups when it comes to running it. And there's a couple extra mods you can put onto there to make it a little bit better. But the base game itself is still fan-freaking-tastic. BioWare did a phenomenal job with this game. Right? So Knights of the Old Republic. Okay, it's awesome. Another classic Star Wars game on PC we're going to get into. Star Wars Battlefront. This is automatic A tier, okay? The only reason I'm putting it out there right now, the only reason that I am not putting this in S tier is because of this bad boy over here, Star Wars Battlefront 2. Automatic S tier, okay? So Battlefront 1 and Battlefront 2 Classic.
That's another command post under Republic control. Enemy reinforcements are decreasing.
Amazing Star Wars games. Battlefront 1, I think, is good at its base level. It's fun to play on any one of the platforms. I played it a lot on PlayStation 2. It's awesome on Xbox. On PC, it's just as good. And the PC scene for a lot of people is amazing. But when Battlefront 2 came out, it blew everything else out the water. It's still, to this day, one of the best Star Wars games out there. Right next to Knights of the Old Republic. That's why Battlefront 2 is an automatic S-tier Star Wars game. And Battlefront 1 is an A-tier Star Wars game. Still a must-play, in my opinion. But still, Battlefront 2 is just above that game.
Command post is under Republic control. Hostile reinforcements are being depleted.
So look at this tier list. It's phenomenal. So many good ones. But still, fantastic classic Star Wars games that you need to play if you haven't already done so. Those are like mandatory for every Star Wars fan. And then finally also, this one, Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords. This is another one I'm going to put in A tier. And the only reason why I put it in A tier, again, some people would argue it belongs in S tier, but I put it in A tier because, one, I think sometimes it could be a little bit tougher to run correctly on PC hardware, as well as also the other issues that the game has had on other platforms. But also, too, I just think that the story of Knights of the Old Republic 1 is better than Knights of the Old Republic 2. That's a preference thing for me. I've talked about that in the previous list that I mentioned with the Xbox tier list. But still, doesn't take away from how fantastic Knights of the Old Republic 2 is. There's a lot of great stuff in it. I just prefer Knights of the Old Republic 1 better. I think that's the better game over this one because I would, if I had to choose between the two of them that I'm going to go back to more, I'm going to go back to the first game than I do the second, but still just as good. And also keep in mind too, I will mention, because this is a good footnote, Knights of the Old Republic 2 has that mod, the restored content mod, that adds extra content that was originally supposed to be in this game on its release, but never made it out. It got cut from the game. So if you're playing this game on PC, KOTOR 2, definitely get that restored content mod because there's so much more extra stuff that makes the game better overall as an experience. Moving on from there, another one on PC, Republic Commando.
Some Vector, Commando.
Retreating Vector.
I thought you'd never ask, sir.
Republic Commando, I'm going to put this in A tier as well. The only reason why I put it in A tier, which is very similar, I believe, to what I did with the Xbox version, Republic Commando looks great, fantastic to play through, interesting story, interesting premise, very similar to Rainbow Six or Ghost Recon. The only problem is, though, is the controls, and I think that the controls and just the movement could be very stiff compared to other FPS games of the time, which is a darn shame because that's an amazing premise for a Star Wars game that they just never follow up on. And I can imagine like just another sequel to this game being like Imperial Commando that would have been just as amazing as this one. But I've already talked about Republic Commando a number of times. Go check out my full video review of Republic Commando that's on the channel right now as well later, because I get into so much more detail specifically about the console version of that game, but could also be applied to the PC version as well, because there's not really a lot of differences between them other than the way they run and other than the way they control, depending on what you actually use to control the game. Either PCs like, mouse and keyboard, or a controller. So a lot of games we're running through, man. Okay. Lego Star Wars, the video game. Where is it? There it is. Okay. Lego Star Wars gets a B tier. Okay. Because I've said in all the previous lists, I've talked about Lego Star Wars multiple times, and most of these are all going to be in the same like positions as they were in those tier lists. It's a fantastic game, challenging. Oh, it's always fun just to play a Lego game because they're super chill. With Star Wars, it's just as fun. It has a great sense of humor. It's a fun game overall to play. Lego Star Wars 2, I'm going to put in A tier because I prefer the original trilogy. I think it got better over the original game because we're dealing with the original 3 movies. But also, I just think it's fun overall to play through. Lego Star Wars 3, I'm going to put in A tier as well because, again, you get the voice acting, you get all that extra stuff. On top of that, even more collectibles to find in there. I think it's awesome. Same thing with Lego Star Wars, the complete saga. Again, so many more games. Actually, you know what? I'm actually going to put this... Yeah, I'm going to put this in there in, in A tier. Because I find that game to be so much more, so much more value, so many more unlockables. You're going to be spending a lot of time playing it, more so because it's basically the first 2 games combined together, which is great. So it's pretty good. And then same thing, Lego Star Wars The Force Awakens. I'm also going to put in A tier as well because of the voice acting. Even though it takes place in the sequel trilogy, to be fair, like I've said in my previous videos, I still think it's a solid Star Wars game, or solid Lego Star Wars game that I think is fun to play through. Even if you don't like the sequels, it's still just as good. Moving on from there, okay, there's a lot of games that we're running through, so we're kind of like thinning out the list here with all the different entries. But look at this list, man. So many more A-tier Star Wars games than we've ever seen in any of the previous entries because they're so good. There's so many good ones. So many great ones in here. But now, let's talk about another classic, okay? Star Wars Empire at War. This right here, automatic S-tier Star Wars game. And the reason being, like I've been alluding to this entire time since I've been going through Galactic Battlegrounds, Rebellion, all that stuff, Force Commander, same thing. This right here, Empire at War, is the Star Wars game that you want to play, okay? That's the Star Wars game you want to actually play when it comes to RTS games. And the reason being is because it's just so freaking good, son. It's so good. The mods are amazing. The core game itself, the gameplay, the RTS gameplay, the characters you can interact with, everything else, so freaking good. This is the RTS for a Star Wars fan, okay? Mainly because even beyond that, the mod scene is fantastic, yo. There's so many like extra scenarios involving the Chiss Ascendancy with Thrawn, Mara Jade, all the EU stuff. There's even sequel stuff that people have made and modded into this game. It gets ridiculous. There's even like expanding universe stuff involving Kyle Katarn. I think there's even one for Starkiller, I think from The Force Unleashed. I think that's, if I remember correctly, I remember seeing it online where it just gets ridiculous. And I know a couple of other people have told me that they've messed around with a lot of the mods for this game, and it gets really cool. Like, there's just some amazing stuff to do with this game. Again, if you're an RTS fan, that's your Star Wars game, is Empire at War. If you're not into the RTS genre, you won't get a lot out of it. But again, you're not really looking for games like this. But this is definitely a must-play if you're into real-time strategy, because it is just so freaking good.
Charming to the last.
Talked about all those like classic Star Wars games, and I had to move my camera a little bit because the list is getting pretty big, as you could tell. Yeah, the Gungan Frontier, okay? The Gungan Frontier is another one that's like super random, okay? It's not necessarily bad, okay? There's a couple like, I guess you could say a little like extra things you're going to get out of it, but this one I'm going to put in C tier because this is one of those episode 1 games that people will play one time and just not remember much out of it. Like, it's just kind of like whatever, okay? And that's unfortunately the truth with a lot of episode 1 games where a lot of people just, again, we got caught up in the hype of episode 1, The Phantom Menace, because there was a lot of merchandising that came out with it, but still, it's not that bad. It's an interesting idea, you know, as far as like setting up an ecosystem and everything else, but it's just, again, it's not garbage, it's not terrible, okay, but it's still not greater than anything. You know what? If I'm being real here, I'm going to move episode 1, Gungan Frontier, over to D tier. I think that's fair because I put the droid games in there. I think it's fair also to put that because, again, it's an interesting premise. It's an interesting idea and something different as far as approaching a Star Wars game, but it's definitely not as good as any of those games. I don't think it's the same way as like X-Wing, TIE Fighter, Rebel Assault, Racer, any of those other games. I think it's below those. So yeah, I think D tier is a much more better placement for that. I think that's a much more interesting, much more fair spot for that game to be on. So outside of that, okay, let's move on now to Star Wars The Force Unleashed. There it is. Force Unleashed, okay, it's on PC, but there's not much different. I put this one, Force Unleashed, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I put this one in A tier, like I've always said. Again, I love The Force Unleashed. I think that's an amazing game. I think that the better version, personally for me, is on the PlayStation 3, the Ultimate Sith Edition, which is what that box art is. But still, okay, no matter where you play The Force Unleashed, as long as you're playing like the version that has the stuff that you got from the PlayStation 3, I think it's the best version. I think you're going to enjoy it. So I could put The Force Unleashed on there. Now, The Force Unleashed 2, however, even on PC, it's still a garbage game. Okay, I'm going to put that at D tier. The Force Unleashed 2, as much as people like Starkiller, this was still a bad game. And there's nothing different about this game on PC compared to the other consoles. Nothing better, nothing worse. It just is. So it stays in the spot roughly of where I put it, okay? And compared to the handheld versions, which are much more garbage compared to this, but still. Force Unleashed 2, not that great. Force Unleashed 1, however, is amazing. Definitely play it. It's not S tier because of some of the technical issues that it has, but it's still pretty darn good and definitely a must-play for a lot of Star Wars fans out there. Moving on from there, we got a couple more games. Look at this. Look at this list, man. So many A tier Star Wars games, so many B tier, so many S tier, which is amazing. Okay. Star Wars The Old Republic. This is another S-tier Star Wars game. And the reason being, even though, again, I'm not a big MMO guy, but I have to respect all the ambition and all the, care that goes into The Old Republic, which is still going on right now. If you've never played Star Wars The Old Republic, it's an MMO that's set in the Old Republic era. It has a lot of the same things that you got, similar to Star Wars Galaxies, but with a lot more better quality of life stuff, a lot more mindset from modern-day MMOs from Final Fantasy XIV, World of Warcraft, Guild Wars, and many others. A lot of those different characteristics and attributes are put into Star Wars The Old Republic. And it's still maintenance today, getting a ton of expansions. I think they got 3 expansions so far, if I'm not mistaken. 3 or 4 expansions. There's a lot. A lot of content within this game, and if you want an MMO set in the Star Wars universe and you can't play Star Wars Galaxies anymore, that's the game that you're going to go to, and luckily, they're still supporting it, and it's still pretty darn good for a lot of people, so check it out if you haven't already. Again, I'm not a big MMO guy, I don't play the Old Republic myself, but I do respect it. I do see the passion, I still see the care into it, and I still see why people love that style of game. It's still pretty darn good for a lot of Star Wars fans.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
Okay, we got a couple more I think I got left out of those here, and I just want to see, because again, I'm going in order for a lot of the games. Star Wars, The Clone Wars, Galactic Heroes, Republic Heroes. Same thing like I've said, this is a B-tier Star Wars game, or actually, yeah, there's a B-tier Star Wars game, because, again, not much different that I could say compared to the console versions. For PC anyway, I'm going to put it in B-tier, because in comparison to everything else, I think that it's okay, it's good if you like the Clone Wars, it's good if you like co-op games, but not really much to really do. Not really much beyond that, and I feel like there's better Star Wars PC games compared to this. If you're going to play Republic Heroes, you're going to play it on consoles, more than likely, not really on PC, but that's just my own personal opinion. Let me know if you agree with me or not in the comment section down below. Let's talk about Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. This is an A-tier Star Wars game. Not much different about this game compared to the console versions on PC. It's still an awesome game. I still think Jedi Survivor, personally, I don't have it on this list because, again, that game just came out, and, again, it's going to be an S tier. Same thing like what I said before, but A tier for Jedi Fallen Order. The game is awesome. Cal Kestis is an awesome character. It's a fun story to play through. Jedi Survivor is better, but that game also has a lot of issues with the PC version. You're going to play that on consoles, more than likely. And I would argue you might want to play this game on consoles as well, like PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5. But if you're going to get it on PC, this is where I would place it, A tier. Moving on from there, Star Wars Battlefront from EA. Okay, going to put this one, honestly, in B tier. And I think I put it in B tier in one of my earlier lists on PlayStation 4 and also on Xbox Series S or Series X. It's still ambitious. It's a reboot of Star Wars Battlefront done by EA, the same team that does Battlefields. It looks beautiful. It's one of the best looking Star Wars games around, but it still has problems with content. There isn't a lot of like extra stuff in it. It does have a couple DLC stuff, and I think there's a mod scene for the original Battlefront, but nothing, I will say, is as good as its sequel, which I would put up in S tier. Okay, automatic S tier.
Impressive. Most impressive.
Reason being is because Star Wars Battlefront 2, as much as you could criticize it, it got better with time. There's a ridiculous mod scene on PC for Star Wars Battlefront 2 from EA. You got all these new heroes, got all these new units, new cosmetics. It's a shame because EA stopped supporting this game at one point after they released a couple packs and stuff and they did the Celebration Edition, and the mod scene on PC just picked this game up and just ran with it. Like, they got Ahsoka in there now, they got the Mandalorian, they got freaking, I think they even had Thrawn at one point, like somebody modded into the game. Like, there's a lot of ridiculous mods for Star Wars Battlefront 2 from EA. It's so good to see because if only they continued supporting it officially, we would have gotten some amazing collaborations with Ahsoka, Mandalorian, maybe even, Andor, or anything else involving Star Wars stuff from Disney+. But hey, that's what the mod scene is for. That's why fans pick up the slack and make these games that are really ambitious and really fun to play through continue onward long after they've been released, which is cool. So I put Star Wars Battlefront 2 in S tier, Star Wars Battlefront, the original, on B tier, because I think that's much more fair to put that on there.
You are a bold one.
You could probably bump that game up to A tier because of the mods, but I think B tier is much more fair with it. I think Battlefront 2 is the better game overall, but also the better game with the mod scene. I think that people love that game on PC with the mods. Star Wars Squadrons. Okay, Star Wars Squadrons, again, not much different compared to the console version of this. So this one I'm going to put in B tier because I think B tier is also fair to drop that in there. Star Wars Squadrons, it takes everything that you loved about the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games and modernizes it. The problem is, though, is that I think that it's interesting, but this one didn't get a lot of support. And I don't even know if it has like a big mod scene on PC. But I do know that there's just not much difference from the console versions. It's like, if you love piloting an X-Wing starfighter or a TIE fighter, you're going to love playing through this game. I just think that the story is weak. You know, in my personal opinion, I don't think that the story is all that great, especially when you compare it to like the Battlefront 2 story mode, which I think is better, even though I have problems with that story in general. But I wish that this game got more official support. I would love to see more ships. I would have loved to see more scenarios. I think it could have been really ambitious and really fun, much like in the same vein as X-Wing versus TIE Fighter or X-Wing Alliance. I feel like those games really set the template for what Squadrons could be, but again, I'm also much more of a bigger Rogue Squadron fan than I am of the TIE Fighter games or the X-Wing games, and that's a preference thing, but still, not a bad game, not a great game, but still pretty darn good for what it is.
Nice work, Rogue Squadron. We might make a name for ourselves after all.
And then finally, we have the Star Wars Droid Repair Bay, which is, again, I'm going to put this in C tier because it just kind of exists the way it is right there. I'm trying to make sure that I'm a little bit away from the actual list here because this list is big, yo. As you could tell, this list is really freaking big. But the Droid Repair Station, I think, is just a nice novel game. I don't think, from my understanding, I don't think that that's a VR game because when I played it, I didn't play it in VR. I played it like just randomly at one point, okay? Because there's other VR games. I know there's the one from, I think it's from Tales from Galaxy's Edge, which is the VR game. But I think you could also play Droid Repair Bay in VR as well, if I'm not mistaken. The point is, though, is that it's a game that just kind of exists. It's not as good as any of these other games. It's just like one of those games that was released to capitalize on the sequel trilogy and also the stuff that Disney was doing with their theme parks and Walt Disney World and Disneyland. And it kind of just is. I can't really knock it. I can't knock it in the same way that I could for the DroidWorks, because at least the DroidWorks was ambitious, but again, it's not something you're going to really want to go back to as much. So, you know what? I'm going to amend that. I'm going to put that in D tier. I'm going to put it in D tier. I think it's fair to put it right next to the other DroidWorks games. You know, now thinking about it, you know, all the droid games, all in D tier. D for droid. But still, it's just a game, Droid Repair Bay, and any one of these games, you're going to play it one time for the novelty of it. You're not going to want to come back to it ever again, or you're not going to care to. You know, same thing with the episode Gungan Frontier, same thing. And especially the Force Unleashed 2 and Yoda stories. They're just kind of meh. They're just kind of there. You know, they're whatever. They're not that great. They're a little bit less than some of these other games.
I don't believe that. And you're sounding like a separatist.
So, and the only game, again, like I mentioned before, that's not on here, but I would place it up in S tier, would be Star Wars Jedi Survivor. But again, that game has a lot of issues and stuff on PC, and I feel like you're going to play that game more on consoles than you would on a PC. But I digress. Here is the ultimate tier list of Star Wars games for PC platform, man. Oh my God. So many games we ran through. 50 games, technically 51 if you count Jedi Survivor, right? But my God. So many damn games, yo. So many damn games. So starting from the top. Let's just go through everything here, man. Starting from the top. Let's go from S tier, okay? S tier, we got Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds, Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 1, Battlefront 2 Classic, Empire at War, The Old Republic MMO, and Star Wars Battlefront 2 from EA. All S-tier Star Wars games, must-plays on PC. They're phenomenal, they're epic, they're awesome. They're really mandatory playthroughs for every single person out there that loves Star Wars games on PC. Those are like the creme de la creme of the PC platform, at least in my personal opinion. Moving on to A tier. A tier Star Wars games: Star Wars Force Commander, Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast, Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 with all of its stuff, Star Wars Galaxies, Battlefront Classic, the original, Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords, Republic Commando, Lego Star Wars 2, the original saga, Lego Star Wars 3, The Clone Wars, Lego Star Wars The Complete Saga, Lego Star Wars The Force Awakens, Star Wars The Force Unleashed, and Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. All A-tier Star Wars games. They're still must-plays in my personal opinion as far as the experience. If you want a great Star Wars game that you can really enjoy, that's not in the S-tier rank. It's a little bit less than those on the S-tier rank, but still awesome games that I could recommend to anybody, that they're a lot of fun to play through.
Impressive. Most impressive.
Moving on to B tier, we have Star Wars Arcade, Star Wars X-Wing Alliance, Star Wars X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, Dark Forces, the original, Dark Forces, Star Wars Rebellion, Star Wars Starfighter, Lego Star Wars, the video game, the first game, Star Wars The Clone Wars Republic Heroes, EA Star Wars Battlefront, and Star Wars Squadrons. All B-tier Star Wars games. They're pretty good for what they are. They offer a lot of good stuff for them if you decide to play them. Not as good as both S and A tier games, but still pretty darn good for what they are. I think that they're very enjoyable. You can still recommend this to any Star Wars fan that's going to get looking for something that they could play through and have a great time with them.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
Going to C tier now, we got Star Wars Return of the Jedi Arcade, Star Wars Chess, Star Wars X-Wing, Star Wars TIE Fighter, Rebel Assault 2 The Hidden Empire, Star Wars Rogue Squadron 3D, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace, and Star Wars Battle for Naboo. All C-tier Star Wars games. These have a lot more issues and a lot more things that I feel like make them not as good as some of the higher tier games. You could still play them and enjoy them if you want, especially if you just are curious about them and you want to check out a Star Wars game, especially if you've never played any of them before. You could probably find them on PC right now on places like Steam or any other spot you could find Star Wars games on PC. But these are games that I feel like they're just kind of there. They exist. They're not the great ones, but they still are there, and they have the Star Wars name on them.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Moving on to D tier. D tier is when we start to really get low on the totem pole. We got Star Wars Droid Works, Star Wars Droid Repair Bay, Star Wars Pit Droids, Star Wars Yoda Stories, Star Wars Episode 1 The Gungan Frontier, and Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2. These are D-tier Star Wars games that either are kind of irrelevant at this point, they don't offer a lot of value when it comes to playing them, you're not really going to think about them after playing them one time, or they're just pretty terrible in comparison to the rest of the tier list, especially with The Force Unleashed 2. That game, for all its faults, man, it should have been much better than what it was. But that's the D-tier Star Wars list games. Again, not trash tier, but they're just kind of existing. They're just there, and if you're going to go play a Star Wars game, you might not go to any one of these games, to be honest with you. And then finally, we got trash tier Star Wars games. The lowest of the low on the PC, in my personal opinion. And again, it's not a knock to them being children's learning games. But these are the games that I feel like you're not really going to get much out of that you should probably avoid. And that's all the different Star Wars learning games. Okay, we got Yoda's Challenge, we got Jar Jar's Journey, and we got Star Wars Math. And again, they are what they are. They do serve their purpose, but as far as the grand scheme of Star Wars games on PC, you're not going to want to play any of these games, so avoid them. They're kind of whatever. They're meh. They just exist. Don't bother them. They're not bothering anybody else. Move on from there and go play any one of the other Star Wars games on PC that we have higher on the tier list, especially the S-tier Star Wars list. Okay, those are the games you need to be playing.
We will deal with your rebel friends soon enough.
So there you go, everyone. Those are my thoughts about every single Star Wars game on PC. Like I said, the only one missing here that I didn't include a box art for, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which I would still put in S tier along with everything else, but I would play that more on consoles than PC. The point is that these are all the games on PC when it comes to Star Wars, and there's a lot on here. A lot of classics, a lot of big ones that people grew up with, and these were so many games to run through. Again, refreshing my memory, playing some of these games. I played just about every single one of these games over the years, and it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a ridiculous amount of Star Wars content. Some great times, especially during the era of like the late 90s into the early 2000s, which I felt was the golden era of Star Wars games. This is where you got like Knights of the Old Republic, Battlefront 2, Jedi Academy, all these Empire at War. So many good ones, man. So many great freaking Star Wars games, especially on the PC. I think the PC right now has the most S-tier Star Wars games in every single one of these episodes of these videos, which is awesome. And the same thing also has the most A-tier Star Wars games too, on top of that, because a lot of them are really freaking good on PC. That's my thoughts on all these Star Wars games. Let me know your thoughts about every single Star Wars PC game, or at least the tier list that we have now, in the comments section down below. Tell me, do you agree with my ranking of all these games on the tier list? Do you disagree with them? Where would you actually shift anything around if you would actually move around some of the games between the different tiers? Or what other games do you feel like I should have talked about more, or other games I should actually give it a little bit more credit to and put them higher on the tier list? Tell me about that stuff down below in the comment section. Make sure you leave a like on this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And make sure you check out the rest of my playlist for all the different Star Wars games for the Ultimate Star Wars Games tier list. Every single video is up right now on the channel, including all the PlayStation games and the PlayStation platforms, all the Xbox Star Wars games for the Xbox platforms, every single Nintendo Star Wars game on both handhelds and on home consoles is up right now, and the third-party consoles as well. So like the Sega Genesis, the Dreamcast, the Sega CD, all those different platforms. There's a lot on there that you definitely need to check out when you can. But with that being said, I will talk to all of you again very soon. Peace out, and stay epic, everybody.